Deep Space Nine is the anomaly of the Star Trek universe. It diverted from the Trek norm the moment it aired in '93, and its stories and characters were bound to as well. The series was able to tackle subject matter much darker and realer than The Next Generation or the original series ever had, thanks to its settings and characters. Deeply explored stories of slavery, violence, trauma, and war are woven throughout the show. The writers didn't show fear for these topics, unlike most television airing at the time. Star Trek has always been ahead in its messages and ideals, but Deep Space Nine brought it a step further that's often unrecognized. Rejoined is episode 5 of Deep Space Nine's 4th season. It aired October 10th, 1995, and it featured Star Trek's first same-sex relationship. It received lots of backlash from angry viewers at the time, and some networks didn't even air the episode. For the 90s, this isn't surprising, but the fact that the show still decided to take the step is worth something. Rejoined is just a gem within the vast museum of beautifully curated episodes of Deep Space Nine, and I recommend diving into them all if you haven't already. But this story holds a special place in my heart, and I wanted to figure out what exactly about this episode that resonates with me. Personally, it's a portrayal of same-sex romance well executed for not just its time period, but that I argue holds up against media being released today. With its 25th anniversary this year, Rejoined deserves some love. And at its core, it's a story about love. One that those involved in creating poured their hearts into. So here's my love letter back.
It's really good to see you again, Dax. Oh, that sounds so strange. I mean, I'm looking at a different face, hearing a different voice. But somehow it's still you.
Let's start with Jadzia Dax. Dax is a main character on Deep Space Nine. She's an alien species called Trill and is the protagonist of this episode. For any deconstruction of this episode to happen, you have to understand what a Trill is and how Trill society functions. Hailing from the planet Trill, they're a joined species between host, a humanoid, and symbiont, a sentient worm, more or less, and when joined, they become one individual. The host gaining the memories and some personality from past hosts, while the symbiont takes on the knowledge and skills of the current host. It's a synthesis. The basis of all Trill society is the safeguard and continuation of the symbiont's lives and experiences. The episode opens with Jadzia performing a sleight of hand trick to Bashir and Quark. She's called to Sisko's office, where he promptly tells her there's a science team, headed by a Lenara Khan, coming to conduct experiments. Sisko suggests she take some vacation, and in the next scene, Khan is revealed to be the widowed wife of a previous host of the Dax symbiont.
You know that woman. I know her. She used to be my wife.
Due to a Trill law forbidding hosts of symbionts who had past relationships from rejoining, Sisko and Lenara's brother Bajal are concerned for the two women working together, as the result of breaking said law is exile from Trill and in turn, the eventual death of the symbionts. Though they promise they can be professional, an undeniable banter forms between them, becoming acquainted not just as the symbionts Dax and Khan, but now as Jadzia and Lenara. The two very obviously feel the same spark, filling it with eye contact, longing looks, and the nearing proximity over the episode. Their affections become more noticeable, until Bajal questions Lenara, upsetting her and forcing her to retreat to Jadzia. After a certain confrontation of their emotions, they both break their walls and confess their love and desire to be together, sharing a lovely kiss. Later, an accident from the science team's experiment goes wrong and puts Lenara in a near-death situation, where Jadzia rescues her. She comes to Lenara's recovery bedside and declares her desire to be with her and willingness to risk her life for it. Lenara, though, hesitates, expresses her inability to put her feelings ahead of the life of her symbiont, and that she's going back to Trill the following day. She suggests that they'll see each other again, but Jadzia knows that this will be the last time. And across the promenade, Jadzia watches Lenara from above. They almost miss each other, but Lenara finds her eyes, and they share one last look. Star Trek is familiar with one-off romance episodes. Scattered throughout TOS and TNG are escapades of flirtation and dating between main cast and guest stars, always wrapped up and over by the end of the episode. Rejoined is that, but there's something else here. Something it has to say about love and connection that's very intentional and beautiful. Let's get into it. Kira, Bashir, and Quark are conveniently here to help the audience figure out the history and lore that's also confusing them.
So let me get this straight. Dax's first host was named Leela, right? Then Leela dies, and the Dax symbiont goes on to a man named Tobin. Then it's on to Emily, Tarius, Audred...
No. Audred, then Tarius.
Sorry. Audred, Tarius, Duran, Curzon, and then eventually Jadzia. This Dr. Lenara Khan person was once married to...
Tarius. In those days, she wasn't Lenara. And the Khan symbiont, which is now joined to Lenara, used to be joined to a woman named Nilani, and it was Nilani who married Tarius Dax.
But Tarius was killed in a shuttle accident.
And Nilani became a widow. When Nilani died, the Khan symbiont was joined to Lenara.
So that makes Lenara Jadzia's ex-wife.
It's a little more complicated than that, Quark.
Kira and Bashir specifically have a conversation that's pretty pivotal to the whole episode, which I'll expand on later. But they also explain the main problem of the whole situation.
Having a relationship with a lover from a past life is called a reassociation, and the Trill feel very strongly that it's unnatural. In order to move on from host to host, the symbiont has to learn to let go of the past.
So here's our conflict. What Trill society knows as reassociation. That is, to reconnect with other Trill, specifically family or spouses, from past lives is considered a major taboo and is against Trill law. It's seen as an opposition to what Trill society believes is the meaning of their existence. We'll take a closer look at this later. Their conversation also brings up an interesting question.
Is why Dax and Lenara can't just pick up where they left off. I mean, if they're still in love with each other.
Ah, now there's the rub.
Are Dax and Khan, the symbionts, in love? Or are Jadzia and Lenara, the hosts, in love? And is there really a difference?
The irony is, you and I have more in common than Tarius and Nilani ever did.
Let's start with the question. Are joined Trills an individual, or are the host and symbiont two separate individuals sharing one body? The symbiont carries all the memories and emotions of past hosts, so where is the line between the current host and them? Are they considered to be the same person as well? It's all very confusing. Let's take a quick look at a previous episode called Dax to get a better idea. In the episode, Jadzia is accused and put on trial for a crime her past host, Curzon Dax, supposedly committed. The question becomes not just, did Curzon do it, but can Jadzia, in turn, be held responsible for the actions of a past host? Sisko argues that the person who is being accused of the crime no longer exists. But is that true? The whole episode goes back and forth between the opposing opinions, and at times accidentally acknowledging the validity of the other. What's also interesting is we're introduced to another character that a past host, this time Curzon, was in love with. Though this isn't the question of the episode, Jadzia shows a great deal of affection and continued loyalty toward her past love, including her willingness to die to protect her past host's relationships. The catch is, the trial doesn't end with an answer, cut short by Dax's name being cleared. The show itself never fully gives an answer, and notably, neither did Jadzia, having never made any direct input to the argument the entire episode. What's important is the continued comment by the writers that while other characters may have opinions on where the line is between host and symbiont, there's never a definite answer given to us, even by the Trill themselves. In the TNG episode The Host, which was the first introduction to Trill and the lore hadn't quite been sorted out yet, Dr. Crusher falls in love with a Trill before she knows what being a Trill means and, in consequence, what it means to be in love with them. The Trill ends up dying, and a new host is rushed to save the symbiont, this host being a woman. But what was Beverly in love with? The host or the symbiont? The line between them is portrayed as seemingly non-existent. She herself doesn't know, and her hesitation and subsequent decline of the relationship is portrayed as a human flaw.
Unnatural? How can it be unnatural for a married couple to resume their marriage?
The concept of reassociation and it being a taboo, at least in the context of Rejoined, is very obviously the writers creating a metaphor for homophobia. Kira makes that pretty clear in her earlier scene.
Unnatural.
The stares and social rejections, the consequence of exile like family disownment, fear of death even. I've read criticism of the taboo and its place within the fiction, that it throws a wrench in its own metaphor as there's pretty decent logic behind the law. As a society based around prolonging the experiences of symbionts, going back to old emotions is not moving forward in life, but backward. What I will say is that criticism is valid, the metaphor isn't strong, and the logic of reassociation being against Trill law makes some sense, but I believe what's more important than a faulty metaphor sometimes can be a good story with well-intentioned writers. Reassociation is not seen as necessarily a bad thing to the majority of the crew. It's to them what it is to us, the audience, two people in love with each other. Albeit with some complicated baggage, but in love nonetheless. All I'm saying is, more often I try to find kindness within the intentions of actions. The beauty of storytelling can be just that. Film studies scholar Jean Bruce compared the deception of Dax's magic trick to the deception of their relationship, specifically their kiss, that, quote, the moment is informed by the fact that Dax was a man in her previous life. The relationship has been criticized for not really being an LGBT story, that Torias having been a man throws a wrench in their metaphor again. But really, does their love then not transcend the restrictions of gender and death altogether? As Bruce writes, once the encounter occurs, it can never be taken back, and the image is still one of two women kissing.
I love her, Benjamin.
I know you do.
There's no question that for 95, Rejoined was pushing some boundaries for television. Portrayals of LGBT stories were limited and not often shown the respect that their heterosexual counterparts were. 25 years later, how does Rejoined stand up next to the stories that are on our screens today? Now, I've seen a portrayal of lesbian romance or two in my day, and I wanted to compare. Recently, a film was released that swept the international festivals by storm. Portrait of a Lady on Fire is a French film by Céline Sciamma. The movie follows a painter who's hired to do the wedding portrait of a young aristocratic woman without her knowing, as she refuses to pose for the portrait. The two fall in love, which is shown to us almost entirely through fleeting looks and small gestures. It's been hailed for its portrayal of women, the relationship between them, and the female gaze. Sciamma wanted to create the memory of a love story. The film is told through the memories of the painter, Marianne, and is scattered with intimate details of their encounters, as she was already observing Eloise's details. The gaze, observing someone, can be a way of keeping a part of their essence with you, beyond just their physical presence. Having a relationship between two women takes any kind of male gaze out of the equation, or it should. When asked about the constant looks shared between the women, Sciamma says, quote, it's the idea of a mutual gaze between two subjects that are in love, rather than from a subject to an object. She describes the female gaze as to not objectify the characters, whoever they are, to share their experience, and to propose new power dynamics on screen. So let's look at Rejoined. The intention of the intimacy built within the scenes was not looking to objectify the women, but to share their experiences. Jadzia and Lenara share a balance of power in their relationship, shown both emotionally and visually many times, positioning them over the other's shoulder in the background. Never one above the other, and always at eye level, the episode is full of shot-reverse shots of their intimate eye contact and connection. They both become subjects, to each other and to us, their audience. The difference in scenes where the subjects aren't objects can make representation and give it meaning. The director of this episode happens to be Captain Sisko himself, Avery Brooks, and he made the decision to give his subjects equal power through his direction of them. In her review, Michelle Erica Green pointed out that there's a refreshing lack of gender expectations between Jadzia and Lenara. They both flirt, they both pursue. Green also says that, quote, it's love, not sex, that's the main focus of Dax and Khan's relationship. The appeal in their relationship isn't sexual, it's romantic. It challenges where the line of subject and object is. You feel as if you're experiencing these moments with them. And in Dax's quarters, the two women stood facing each other. There's something about the position of standing face to face, profile shot, something romantic, the essence of a love scene, reminiscent of marriage even, something dignifying and respectful, and I couldn't help but be reminded of something. So what about the Kira and Bashir conversation, huh? I think the exchange between them at the beginning of the episode is pivotal, not just as exposition for the audience, but a way for the writers to tell us exactly what their point is. When Rejoined was airing, it gave us something that hadn't really been shown to audiences much. Most lesbian characters on TV were one-off characters or weren't treated very kindly by writing. Sure, there's exceptions, but unlike so much of what we were seeing on TV, Rejoined gave the relationship and the women involved respect. It's not a story about coming out or being shunned by friends. It's not about death or sadness or heartbreak, at least in the ways you would expect. It's about love. And as it's put in Jamahl Epsicokhan's review, Rejoined isn't about whether or not they have these feelings. It's about what they choose to do about it. The contrast of their choices ultimately becomes heartbreaking, not because it's unrequited or one of them dies or something dramatic, but that simply life moves us forward and some things aren't meant to be. Change is inevitable, and as Lenara warned, perhaps they did get stuck in the past.
I don't understand how two people who have fallen in love and made a life together can be forced to just walk away from each other because of a taboo.
Despite its flaws and jumbled metaphors, at its core, it's a future where it cannot be fathomed that a society could not accept love. And isn't that what Star Trek is? Not only a hopeful view of the future, but a challenge to the present.
What do Klingons dream about?
Things that would send cold chills down your spine and wake you in the middle of the night. It is better you do not know. Excuse me.
I can never tell when he's joking.